So Sincere 7 is primarily a workers' rights organization, predominantly focused on black and the greatly disadvantaged working class. Racial inequality is and has been interwoven in S7's founding, in S7's essence, and in S7's mission. 1.
The My Mother's Keeper mental health advocacy organization provides case management across the nation's capital daily, most especially for families of a marginalized nature who actually is experiencing decreased and diminished quality of life as a result of the existent health care disparities and the ongoing social determinants.
New Life Advocacy Council, DARMO, has historically provided crisis and transitional services and supports for individuals and families across the National Capital Region. We administer a chaplaincy unit that provides crisis and trauma response in the National Capital Region, working in communities, specifically black and brown communities, that face ongoing disparities that rise to the level of crisis events. We respond to critical incidents and support local churches and agencies in their efforts to provide stabilizing supports for individuals and families that are in trauma.
Against evictions. I hate evictions. I fight for tenants. I don't represent developers and landlords. I only represent tenants. They hate to see me coming to the courtroom because they know when I come in there, we at war.
All right, come on.
And I'm not giving up on no tenant because I don't think it's right to put somebody in the street. And I'll do everything I can, even if it takes my last breath, as my mother used to say, to keep somebody in their housing. I hate evictions. Now you have rights. And one of the rights you have is called TOPA, the Tenant Opportunity to Purchase Act. And if you don't think you can buy something, the financing for a building is no different than the financing for a pair of shoes.
You know, the Racial Justice Initiative grant is important in supporting black-led organizations because we usually don't get that money. We don't get the money. Anything substantial as small social justice organizing entities. It's been a struggle for S7 since we began, where Terry, Teresa, and myself, my co-founders, we funded our organization after working our 8-hour shift, and then out of our pockets, you know, basically chipping in, throwing in the pot. So this grant would represent substantial investment where I would be able to commit my efforts to doing the work without being distracted by my real job, quote unquote. That's just important to me.
Receiving funding from the Racial Justice Initiative, in my professional opinion, is imperative for many of the families that we support across the nation's capital. Unfortunately, many of the marginalized families happen to also be African American in nature, and the reality of the cycles of despair and trauma that they live with is very disheartening. So receiving this funding would allow us to be able to offer more families of an African American nature the resources that they need. Many of them are not clear that the mental health challenges that they face are embedded with the cycles of social determinants that they have to navigate daily. The reality of not having funding to help address their human rights that in most cases have been violated is very challenging.
Typically in Black and brown communities, organizations that are on the front line are accustomed to doing more with less. We have learned to leverage the resources that we have. So this initiative and the fact that the Horning family has sensitized their perspective to recognizing that supporting organizations in Black American communities is insightful and a significant boost. The ability to have this resource gives us the opportunity to increase and expand our reach and our influence, and as it relates to the issues of the disparities and the injustices that we have historically seen in our communities, it's high time that we see more responsive funding to help us complete the mission.
Would funding from this racial...
How's it going? You know who it is. It's your girl. We out here in this community. Palms up. We got seniors out here with no heat, and it's not okay. And we're on the case as we told you we would be. We want to thank our community partner, Mr. Kenneth Crock and Uncut Live, for being out here with us. We're talking to Miss Sherby Black today, and I want you to know that she's going to share some very unsettling information with us in a pandemic. We've got to hold our city officials accountable. We've got to hold these property managers accountable. If you're out here living in this cold weather with no heat, if your home is infested with rats and mice like many of the tenants over here in Woodbury Apartments off of Savannah Terrace in Southeast and Ward 8, I need you to speak out and let us know. Palms up. We're not having it. We're not having it.
Don't mind the words. No more vain waiting. This world in anticipation.
You were sharing with us that you're heating your apartment with your stove.
Right, my heater, and I had to boil a pot of water to keep warm.
And you're saying at night?
At night and during the daytime, especially at night, it's really cold.
That's
okay,
ridiculous.
and I had to wear my house coat to keep warm. I got socks on, you see, I got my pants on, my boots, and everything on.
How long you been dealing with this?
Ever since November.
November?
October, really October, ever since October.
And what are they telling you? Well, first of all, your management company here is Capital Realty.
Yes, it is.
And what they just took over, but what are they telling you when you call them?
Okay, they take so long to come. Okay, when I told them about I didn't have no heat, they came to bleed my radiator 2 times. It didn't work. So I was telling them, you need to bleed them more. Okay, I don't have no heat in my
Radiators just cold.
All of them is cold. All my heater is closed. But I want to show you this too.
Okay, we're with you.
Okay.
Okay.
Like, see these mice trap?
I
got
heard.
so many mice.
We just talked to one of your other
Look,
neighbors.
see, I be catching mice every day. All over here, I got mice everywhere. Only reason I got this pack because they like to renovate us. Okay, see all these mice trapped? Okay, I'm going to show you my bathroom.
Got mice infestation during a pandemic. Nobody should have to live like
My
this. No
bathroom
heat.
ceiling had fell.
I heard about them, but look how they left that.
Look how they
Is
left
that
my
supposed
bathroom.
to be fixed?
And then not only this, look at this.
Look at that.
Look
Who's
at
gonna
this.
take a bath in there?
I don't take no bath. I take a shower.
Yeah, that's ridiculous.
I take a shower.
Rationalizing to want me or to explain the insane insanity. I can't just kneel and pray, for they come for my longevity. Thus no more passivity. We're here.
Not only from the administrative level, but the level of field work and the responses that we engage is paramount. It's what we do on the ground that makes the difference. We have a task force of about 15 organizations now. We have learned to pool resources. So this opportunity gives us the ability to better leverage time and create the type of new responses and address the changes that we see, especially with the pandemic. It's paramount.
It is very important to recognize matters of why our advocacy is very necessary and important. In the case of our vulnerable populations, and especially amidst a pandemic, to expect that our vulnerable citizens would be able to navigate something as complex as having a letter of discharge from their program upon which they're receiving services from the government agency that they're registered with. The reality of receiving that and having to understand it during a pandemic in and of itself is a circumstance that allows many, or would allow many of our citizens to spiral. This specific case that I recall, this particular citizen was very much traumatized in the understanding of not knowing what his next steps would be, having been cared for in a system that we feel is not properly able to help him to navigate his daily challenges. He was faced with being discharged, and the unlawful understanding of exposing our vulnerable citizen to a homeless reality is part of the reason why our advocacy needs to be funded. There are too many citizens that are not on our radar that we know are faced with challenges from the governmental agencies that are caring for them, and the lack of proper oversight and transparency in their care is why our advocacy needs to be funded.
If you can imagine that one would have dreams and passions, not necessarily rooted in arts, sports, or fashion, with over 1,000 cultures and over 1 million youths, can you imagine the social and political conflict of even 1 million more views? Thus the jeopardy of your opinions being destroyed by one who may oppose the things that you do, and for fear of the proficiency or efficiency of the rules of the game.
My name is Chaplain Tim Buffalo. I'm the Chief Field Chaplain for NLAC DARMO, and I have been working according to my calling and commitment in community service and response for over 25 years now.
I am Dr. Rhonda L. Hamilton, and I'm the Executive Director of the MI Mother's Keeper Mental Health Advocacy Organization. For the better part of 30 years, I have advocated on behalf of my dear mother, who was diagnosed with schizophrenia in 1979. Professionally, I've been advocating for members in the community, just as my dear mother, for the past 5+ years. And the reality is that we need more advocates on the ground.
I'm Perry Red, Director of MiDaS7's, and have been since our founding in 1999. Been doing this work, committed to fighting for justice and equality in the workplace and in all places.
It is a great travesty when we see how these policies are turned against citizens that, rise up to challenge the injustices in housing, only to have those same municipal officials that they're looking, to support their claims, turn law enforcement departments on them, in the enforcement of slumlord activity or developer activity, where you see clear evidence and issues of corruption at play.
We have a resident a constituent who has been sexually assaulted, for example, and they don't know what to do. They just know something is wrong and something needs to be done. How important are the skill sets that we possess?
Well, I think the relevance is the fact that our organizations have been able to come together and collaborate specifically in bringing case management and logistical legislative influence and supports, coupled with the on-the-ground public safety response. Okay, I mean, even from a faith-oriented perspective, because our chaplains are trained, okay, specifically to provide the know-how in working with law enforcement, but also being able to be an advocate for our communities, okay, to give them what they need, the type of care that is necessary, okay, that their voice is going to be heard. So we've been able to provide a specific response in bringing all three skill sets together and making them work for our citizens. Making them work for our citizens in a powerful and meaningful way so that our citizens can see that somebody cares about them, somebody's listening to them, and somebody's providing adequate response to their concerns.
So one thing I know is that we had tenants in a housing complex with no heat, and they hadn't had heat for 4 months prior to meeting this alliance. And when the individual tenants tried to get the regulatory agency to respond to them, to make the landlord provide them heat, the agency kept them in a box. And that was problematic for me when we realized that there were several tenants in a building who didn't have heat, but not all of them had the same competency level to reach the agency to get someone out to inspect and to cite the landlord. And through our advocacy, we were able to step in and make the regulatory agency inspect the entire building, but not only that building, but that strong advocacy, that guilt-driven type of advocacy that put pressure on those who had the regulatory agency. They ended up inspecting every single building in that development. And then we found out that heat was defective in several of those buildings. But that would have never been revealed without our advocacy. And so it is so important for us to realize that we can change the way they do business, the policies that are in place. So right now, we're working with the DC Council to amend the Housing Protection Act so that these residents, when there are more than 2 people who complain about not having heat, the entire building will go under inspection at that point. And that's some of the change that we're expecting to make through our advocacy and the skill sets that we're applying.
The policies that we seek to impact and ultimately change as it relates to our advocacy work on the ground, most importantly to the reality of having tenants that are not educated about their housing understandings and rights, to the understanding and the lack of the governmental oversights. That's a formula for injustice, we feel. We've witnessed the reality of seeing several applicable agencies fail these tenants, to include the highest of the judicial understandings from our state's attorney, or from, I should say, Office of Attorney General. From our advocacy work, we called for investigations from our IG understandings, and the reality that many of the tenants in this particular situation are still going through and facing slumlord realities. The most disheartening for our agency as a mental health advocacy agency is that the reality of the diminished mental health and the cycles of trauma exposed seniors and children living with hazardous understandings and not properly educated, and having so many of the named governmental agencies fail them, is disheartening. And these are the policies that we want to impact the most. The reality that we could have an entire community of predominantly African American citizens living in such a way that they are unstable mentally, and there is no relief in sight short of the advocates, such as organizations like the MiDaS7. We definitely see the need to affect policies that would hold the government agencies accountable for acting, and most especially in matters where mental health and trauma exposure has been documented.
Socially speaking, the harms to our constituency are numerous and acute, and the list is long. But one of the things that is lost is the hope in this nation's promise, the realization that the laws don't apply to us unless, of course, those laws are punishing us. And that puts us right back in our post-slavery posture. And so it's so relevant to us to realize that without the support of the activists, without the support of the advocates, without the support of the community organizers, our people had very little hope. Because we are the ones that bring more people to the table. We're stronger together than we are separate. And oppressive systems want to keep us separate so that we're powerless. We need support from those who have the resources, but those who don't have the skill sets, or maybe not even the will to do the work, but they have the money. And if we could have just a piece of that, we could empower entire communities. Because right now, some of those folks, they don't feel like they're worth anything. Those folks don't feel like their voices will be heard. And we're about to take some folks up to Capitol Hill because they need to be heard. We want to show people what it looks like to speak directly to those in power. And hopefully one day, those people will be the ones to run for those offices, and they will win power. We're hoping that our work will be the thing that changes their hope, not only in themselves, not only in their communities, but in this nation's promise. Because we live in a country with a sordid history, a tragic history, a racist history. And at every turn, we have to grab and lock arms with our white allies, with those liberal-minded activists, and even with those who you wouldn't even expect to be at the table. And some folks, they're not going to be dragged kicking and screaming into heaven. But we'll drag them kicking and screaming into the moon. You see, folks don't believe it's a problem until it hits them. And we see that with these shootings, with the gun violence, especially the black-on-black gun violence, and with police killings. Because if you don't do something today, then tomorrow it might be you. So we need your assistance. We need your help. We need your support so that we can do what we do well and do best. And we can do it to the fullest extent of our will and power. MiDaS7 will do well with your gift.